I am bringing you 5 wide receivers that I think you should avoid in fantasy football this year. Do me a massive favor. Go ahead and drop a like to show some love. Subscribe if you like fantasy football. And I want you to comment down below right now before you watch the rest of the video. What's a wide receiver that comes to mind? Who do you think should be avoided based off of their current price? Now, before we get into the video, do you want some solid rankings for fantasy football this year? Go ahead and use our code LAND, L-A-N-D, when you're signing up. flockfantasy.com/land. There's a pinned link in the comments that will get you 30% off your membership. And if you choose that Mother Flocker tier, you're going to unlock a direct DM to us for advice all year long. All right, I feel like a video like this just needs some context. So before we start, it needs to be said that a lot of these players are probably going to be on championship rosters. That's just the reality. What I'm telling you today is that based off of their cost or ADP, average draft position, I think they are not worth that cost. I think there are better picks at that cost or better players at that cost. I would rather pivot to other options. These are all fantastic real life NFL players, but based on their current cost, I think maybe you should avoid what it would cost to get them on your team. So first wide receiver, again, I love this player, but I'm probably not going to have much DK Metcalf in fantasy football this year. Underdog, he's currently he has an ADP of wide receiver 15. He's my wide receiver 18, and even wide receiver 18, I don't feel extremely comfortable with. Firstly, like, this has nothing to do with Geno Smith whatsoever. This has nothing to do with him. I was a big advocate of his last year, and he was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL in all of 2022. But the reason I'm avoiding him is because everyone is currently overpaying for the fantasy points that they actually receive. And I hear this narrative, the Seahawks are going to throw the ball even more now. Well, last year, Geno Smith threw the ball 572 times. Hang with me for a second. Russell Wilson, in his 10 years as a Seattle Seahawk, never threw the ball that much in a single year. Not one single time. In fact, if you average his 10 years, how many pass attempts he had on average, you're looking at almost 100 less at 473.5 attempts a year. Geno threw the ball already his first year as a starter as a Seahawk more than Russell Wilson ever did. So Geno's already brought a ton of volume, more than DK's probably ever seen. DK Metcalf, currently ranked as a wide receiver 15, he has not returned that value on a points per game basis since 2020. If you look at his points per game every year in the NFL, it goes up from 2019 to 2020. He has a breakout year, but in 2021 and in 2022, that number is consistently going down. In 2022, on a per game basis, he was only the 24th best receiver. That is barely in the wide receiver 2 range for a standard like 12-man league. Let's look at players who scored more points per game than DK Metcalf last year. Brandon Ayuk, Mike Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Christian Kirk, Tyler Lockett, his teammate Michael Pittman, Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, Chris Godwin. Why did I mention all those names? All those players, DK Metcalf is currently ranked ahead of heading into 2023. All those players have different situations, but still, I think the price is a little too rich for what you're actually getting. At the end of the day, who cares what the name is? We want fantasy points. And we are adding competition for targets. Last year, you're telling me DK Metcalf was 24th in points per game, and we just added competition. The Seahawks added to their offense in a big way this offseason, adding my wide receiver 1 in the draft, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and my running back 3 in the draft, Zach Charbonnet, who is a talented pass catcher in his own right. In 2022, DK Metcalf accounted for 25.5% of the Seahawks targets. Meanwhile, Tyler Lockett accounted for 21.2% of the team's targets, the team's target share. So what percentage of that pie do we anticipate JSN taking? If DK Metcalf already had over 25% of the pie and was the wide receiver 24 in points per game, and now you add what I believe to be an elite wide receiver in Jackson Smith-Njigba, what percentage of that pie, what's it going to look like now? Well, last year in 2022, why don't we look at the target share that these rookie wide receivers had? You can see Drake London, Garrett Wilson, all these top names. And if you average those receivers, I had 6 receivers. I didn't include Jameson Williams here because he only played 6 games. It's not a very fair sample size. But if you average out those 6 wide receivers, they averaged 20.5% of their team's target share. You're like, I want a larger sample size. Maybe you're that person right now who's saying, I want a larger sample size than that. Well, how about 2020 to 2022, a 3-year sample size? If you look at first round wide receivers in that 3-year time span and their target share as a rookie, all 16 of those wide receivers who played at least half of the games that year, they averaged 18.1% of their team's target share as a rookie. I guess it depends on how you view JSN. Like I said earlier, I think he's an elite wide receiver prospect. So if he demands 15 to 20% of his team's target share, who's going to lose out? It's you don't need to be a math scientist to figure this one out, guys. Everyone's losing out. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. No one is excluded from losing out on target share. At the end of the day, I love DK Metcalf as a real life NFL wide receiver. I have a ton of stock of him in Dynasty. But in season-long formats, I just think he's being drafted too high for the actual return that you're going to get. So at cost, give me Devonta Smith, Olave, T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy. Keyword there is at cost because those guys are cheaper. I might avoid DK Metcalf in the range he's currently being drafted. The next wide receiver that I personally will be avoiding in 2023 drafts is Mike Evans. He's currently, he has the ADP of wide receiver 32. According to Underdog, he is my wide receiver 37. And the big thing here, which we can all talk about, but let's dive deeper. You're going from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield. I remember all last offseason, I was telling people they were too high on DJ Moore, and it was like I had the plague. People were like, this guy's an idiot. He has no idea what he's talking about, as if Baker Mayfield was going to be some sort of revolutionary quarterback for DJ Moore. This is worst case scenario for Mike Evans. It truly is worst case scenario. Last year, the Bucs with Tom Brady, there's not a single team in the NFL who threw the ball more times per game. Highest passing volume in the NFL. Meanwhile, let's look at Baker Mayfield-led passing offenses since he's been in the NFL, okay? Or since 2020. In 2020, he had the 20th most pass attempts per game for the Browns. Then you see the 28th in 2 years in a row. And then in Carolina, last year, the Carolina Panthers were the 29th ranked pass attempt per game team. Baker Mayfield historically has never been a quarterback that's led high volume passing teams. And if you look at his performance last year, his form last year, look at these numbers. This is out of 33 tracked quarterbacks, okay? There's like 33 is the lowest you can go here. His completion percentage was 32nd. His touchdown percentage was 31st. We keep having people saying, Mike Evans just finds the end zone. He just does it. What happens when you have a quarterback who rarely gets his receivers in the end zone, right? Quarterbacks who found the end zone more often than Baker last year include Mac Jones, Jacoby Brissett, Carson Wentz, Davis Mills, Taylor Heineke, Marcus Mariota, Justin Fields. Should I really continue? His interception percentage was 21st. His adjusted yards per attempt was 29th, and his QBR was dead last of 33 quarterbacks ranked, kind of starting quarterbacks, I guess. Add all that to the fact that this offensive line is an absolute shambles, and that's going to have a huge impact on quarterback play. And the offense as a whole really is just one huge walking question mark. I'm out. I would much rather have Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin, Drake London, Brandon Ayuk. Give me the rookie Jordan Addison in that high passing volume offense. Hollywood Brown, who's going to be the number one, in an offense where, yeah, we got some questions around quarterback, but it's going to be Hollywood Brown. Deontay Johnson. Give me Treylon Burks, who people are sleeping on. So again, is Mike Evans a fantastic real-life NFL player? Yes. Is he in the worst situation possible? Also, yes. All right, the third receiver that I think you should avoid in fantasy drafts, and I can't believe I'm saying this. Let me be very clear. I would challenge you guys to go on our Dynasty channel and find someone who was more actively telling you to buy Calvin Ridley in Dynasty for the past year and a half, for the past 2 years. Ever since Calvin Ridley was suspended, I have been screaming for people to buy him on our Dynasty channel. I remember he was ranked as low as a wide receiver 65 in Dynasty at one point, and I thought people had lost their minds. The last thing I want to do is tell you not to draft Calvin Ridley, but here we are. I think Calvin Ridley's price is a little bit too spicy for me. Underdog ADP, wide receiver 16, I have him ranked as a wide receiver 20, and even I'm a little uneasy about that wide receiver 20 ranking. This has everything to do with what it costs to get Calvin Ridley and nothing to do with his talent. Calvin is currently going as the 32nd player in underdog drafts, meaning if you were in a 12-man league, that's the 308. That is the third player for someone's fantasy team this year. You need absolute pillars in the first 3 rounds of your fantasy drafts. You really don't want that kind of risk. I was all aboard when I could get him in the 6th round, but now I'm sorry, I think this is a little bit too early. We have to keep in mind that Calvin hasn't played a game, and at the time of recording this video, it'll be more by the time you watch this, in 581 days. I want to see him recover to superstar form. You want to see him recover to that form, but we have to have a little bit of lower expectations. And there's a narrative out there that people are saying, well, who knows if Calvin will even be the wide receiver 1 for this team? I don't agree with that. I think Calvin Ridley is worlds apart as a talent compared to the wide receivers on that team. And I think he'll be the number 1. But still, there's not a bunch of scrubs on this team. This is a good receiving core. Christian Kirk was a wide receiver 12 in fantasy last year. He had a career year, 133 targets. Evan Ingram revived his career, finishes a top 5 tight end. And Zay Jones, similar to Christian Kirk, also had an incredible year. Wide receiver 26, 121 targets. Again, I have no doubt that Calvin Ridley is the best of the bunch, but these guys won't be irrelevant. They're going to have a role. I so desperately wanted Calvin Ridley to be a my guy this year because everyone was so low on him. Like November when I was extremely high on him. But it's just really hard to get behind at this point. Like that price is just too much. I'm sorry. I think there's better players or better use of your pick. Okay, the 4th wide receiver, another wide receiver that I love, but we got to be realistic. We got to throw out some hot takes here. I don't think I'll have much Michael Pittman, except for the Dynasty Leagues where I already have him. Underdog has him ranked as a wide receiver 28. He's my wide receiver 32. This all really comes down to one main talking point, and that is for me, you could see this differently, let me know in the comments below. For me, I think across the board, everything that I have seen this offseason, people's expectations for rookie Anthony Richardson are just far too high. I love Anthony Richardson as a prospect. The most athletic quarterback testing-wise we've ever seen in the NFL, without question. I think he's a great dynasty asset. However, I think that has much more to do with his rushing ability and way less to do with his passing ability at this very point of his career. I haven't seen many realistic takes on what to expect from that offense, and I am much more concerned than your average person. I talked about Josh Downs a little bit on our Dynasty channel. Why don't we talk about Michael Pittman here? Because I'm also concerned about him. The narrative I keep hearing from people when they are very high on Pittman, very high on Downs is, well, Shane Steichen is the head coach, and look at what he just did last year with Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. Well, when people say that, they are giving you zero context to that team and to the progression that those players have made. Jalen Hurts last year was in his second full season as an NFL starter, his 3rd year playing in the NFL. He went through an entire transformation process as a passer in the NFL. His IQ grew. He made less mistakes. He learned from those mistakes, and he just got better in the offseason, improved his form. That took 2-3 years for him to get to that point where he is. He was not that player in his first 16 starts. I think healthier expectations. First, why don't we look at what Hurts and Anthony Richardson looked like as passers coming out of college? Why don't we just start there, okay? Coming out of college, Anthony Richardson only had 1 year as a starter. Jalen Hurts had 4. College starts, Jalen Hurts had over 50. A-Rich only had 12. Jalen Hurts had over 9,400 passing yards. A-Rich had around 3,000. Jalen Hurts threw 80 touchdowns and A-Rich had 24. And even in completion percentage, we've got Jalen Hurts almost 11 total percent higher in his collegiate career, his 4 years as a starter at Oklahoma and Alabama, than Anthony Richardson. If you want to compare Shane Steichen and the Eagles of last year, then you need the entire context, and that's what I'm trying to bring to you guys. Anthony Richardson, while he's an incredible athlete, has a long way to go as a passer, as a quarterback in the NFL. And secondly, if you're all aboard Michael Pittman, why don't we look at what Jalen Hurts' wide receivers in his first year as a starter did for fantasy? Because that is the healthier expectation. If you're going to look at Shane Steichen's offense last year and say, look at what A.J. Brown did, look at what Dallas Goedert, Devonta Smith did, that's not the right way to do this. We need to go back to when Jalen Hurts was a rookie and see what sort of production he had. So for his wide receivers, his first year starting, I can make this uglier. I could go back to 2020 because he started a couple games in 2020, but let's do 2021, his first full year as a starter. His wide receiver 1 was Devonta Smith. He finished as a wide receiver 30 in fantasy football, and the wide receiver 36 in points per game. His wide receiver 2, for fantasy purposes, his first year as a starter was Quez Watkins, wide receiver 61. He also had Jalen Reagor, who was the wide receiver 95. In his first full season as a starter, Jalen Hurts had the 4th fewest pass attempts per game. He also had the 12th fewest pass yards per game. We need to lower our expectations for what Anthony Richardson can do for these wide receivers in fantasy as a rookie. Okay, maybe you're saying, well, what about some other names? I mean, what about Justin Fields? What about Josh Allen? Because those are some other comps out there. Well, let's look at their wide receiver 1 in their first year as a full-time starter. Justin Fields, his wide receiver 1 the first year as a starter was Darnell Mooney, wide receiver 58 at 8.5 points per game. Not someone you really wanted to start. How about Josh Allen? His first year as a starter for his number 1 wide receiver for fantasy was Zay Jones, wide receiver 48 at 10.2 points per game. So look, in their first year as starters, Jalen Hurts' best wide receiver was the wide receiver 36 in points per game. Fields, wide receiver 58 in points per game. Josh Allen, wide receiver 48 in points per game. We need to lower expectations for Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, any receiving option here in Indianapolis. In my opinion, the identity of this offense will be built around the run game. Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor are going to be dominant on the ground. I believe this will be a top 5 volume rush offense and a bottom 5 volume pass offense in Anthony Richardson's first year. You gotta give him time to develop. We always have way too high expectations for rookie quarterbacks, and it is very rare that they are able to establish really relevant fantasy wide receivers. I'm sorry, I love Pittman. I have him everywhere in Dynasty, but this is not good for his 2023 season. And the last wide receiver that I am personally avoiding in fantasy football this year is Mike Williams. I personally do not understand whatsoever his current rankings. He's currently at an ADP of wide receiver 20 on Underdog. I am flabbergasted, honestly I am, by that ranking. He is currently my wide receiver 29, and even right now I feel a little bit uneasy about that. Let me ask you, do you guys really think you can rely on Mike Williams as your wide receiver 2 in fantasy this year? Because that's the price point we're currently putting on him, wide receiver 20. As far as his health goes, that's a different conversation. He's a possession wide receiver, wins one-on-one balls. He's always susceptible to injury. In fact, Draft Shark currently has given him a 93% chance of injury, which is about 2 to 3 games is what they project him to miss. But look, regardless of that, let's say he stays healthy. Can you then rely on him as a wide receiver 2? Well, if you look at his points per game historically, the only time you've been able to do that is 2021 and 2022. Over his, let's say 2018 to 2022, let's leave out his rookie season, he's averaging the wide receiver 34.8 in points per game. And let's look at his last season. His per game averages in 2022, 34th in targets, 30th in receptions, 18th in yards. Okay, these are per game. I know he missed time. These are per game. Averaged 0.3 touchdowns per game, and he averaged the 22nd most points per game in fantasy. He averaged the 22nd most points per game Okay, nothing to do with the injury because per game, 22 points per game. Yet we added Quentin Johnston and now he's the wide receiver 20. I can't wrap my head around this. In 2022, without Quentin Johnston, 38% of Mike Williams' games were under 10 points. Now you add Quentin Johnston, if you don't know who he is, he was a wide receiver drafted in the first round this year to the Los Angeles Chargers. First round is big commitment from NFL teams. Remember what I said earlier about Jackson Smith and Jigba and the target share that he got? I mean, let's kind of play devil's advocate here in LA. Mike Williams will lose some opportunities with the Chargers. I just don't see it. Mike Williams only contributed to 15.7% of his team's total receiving offense last year. Now you add Quentin Johnston, Austin Eckler is still there. Keenan Allen is still there. Josh Palmer was an okay player. I don't understand wide receiver 20. Yeah, there'll be some boom games, but man, there'll be a lot of bust games. So I think there's a lot of better options based on ADP. Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin, Chris Godwin, Brandon Ayuk, and even Jordan Addison. I'd take Jordan Addison over Mike Williams at this very point. Is Mike Williams a fantastic NFL player? Yes, absolutely. Is he worth the wide receiver 20 value-wise as a pick in your fantasy drafts? No, he's not. He wasn't even worth that last year on a per game average when it was just Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, battling with Gerald Everett and Josh Palmer. And funnily enough, my floor comp for Quentin Johnston was Mike Williams. So they could be used in some similar ways. They could be used and asked to do some similar things. Mike Williams is obviously better at the catch point at this point of his career. But look, those are 5 wide receivers that I think at their current price, I probably won't have much of. To clarify, have I ever said these are bad players? No. Have I ever said that they're not going to score fantasy points? No. The entire point of the video is that based off of their current price, what it's going to take to get on your team, it's not worth it in my opinion. So do me a massive favor. Why don't you comment down below? Let me know what you think. Drop a like and we'll see you in the next video. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh,
it's so easy. Even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.